Today's video is sponsored by SquareX.com, with over 30 new architectural attacks unveiled at this year's DEF CON 32 that break SASE secure web gateways. No vendor is safe. Make sure that you're protected. Detect, mitigate, and threat hunt, the ultimate in browser detection and response. Visit them today at SquareX.com. In today's episode, we're going to take a trip down memory lane, especially for those beginners. We're going to take a look at setting up and deploying Windows Server. We're going to look at everything that you need to know to get your skills up and running. So stay tuned. This is a good one. Hey everyone, great to see you. Andy here. Welcome back to the channel. You know, on this episode, I'm going to take a trip back and we're going to take a look at a deep dive in setting up, deploying and managing Windows Server. I get so many questions from folks about this, and it's such an important skill set to have. And this will complement my other server series videos. So I did a series on Active Directory and also Advanced Active Directory. And again, I'll pop this video into that same playlist. Now, if you've got questions and comments, as always, just get them down below. And if you've not subscribed, well, come on board, click that subscribe button and come and join us. And if you want more, why not sign up to my Patreon site? Here you'll get access to full Microsoft courses, monthly Zoom calls, and more. So without any further ado, I think it's about time we jump in. Let's take a look. So I'm kicking off my Windows demo here. This is Windows Server 2022. And what we're going to do is just talk about the absolute basics first of all. So the first thing that you need to do is obviously configure your networking. So you basically go in and configure your network settings. So assuming that you have done that, you go in, change your adapter options here. This is pretty much the same for all versions of Windows, by the way. So typically I'm going into IPv4 and I'm configuring my server settings here. My default gateway, of course, is my router. And then, of course, you can see that I've got my DNS configuration there. So that's one of the first things you're going to want to do. For the purpose of this demo, I'm just using private IP address ranges just for training purposes. So the main focus of our attention is on a product called Server Manager. And Server Manager can be found here in the dashboard, and it also you'll find that it launches first. So starting on the left hand side, you'll see that it says local server. And this basically gives you the detail about your local server at a glance. So first of all, you can see that you've got your computer name, and this is probably one of the first things that you're going to want to do. So I'm going to click into this, and I've already gone ahead and done this, but you can see I can, for example, change the name. And you can change the name. It will involve a reboot, however. Out of the box, it typically comes as a work group, all right? And before you can obviously join a domain, you need to create a domain at the moment. So at the moment, this machine is already a domain. Again, that would need a reboot as well. Okay, so once you've configured that, and that's all been configured, the next thing that you're going to want to do is think about adding roles and features. And you can do that by coming up to Manage and adding roles and features. Now, just to save a little bit of time, I've gone ahead and added some of these roles and features here. Some of them are configured and some of them are not. So to do that, I can simply come into Add Roles and Features. If I click onto Next, Remote Desktop Services is a remote management tool, and it's basically on its own. But here are your various roles. So I'm going to go into here. And now, because I have two servers in my environment, I've got DC1 and Server 1, it's saying, hey, which server do you want to install the roles on? So, for example, if I said DC1, I'm going to click Next, and it's then going to give me a selection of the various different roles. Now, the key ones that you're going to want to take a look at is Active Directory domain services, and you can see that that's already installed. I've previously covered that in a couple of videos that I produced, and I'll put the links below in the description for that. Other things that we've got of interest, DHCP and DNS. So these are two kind of core initial services that you want to install. Beyond that, it's really what function is the server going to do? What is it going to do? So you have something called, well, obviously remote desktop services. You've got things like file and storage services here. And in here, you've got rights management services. And this is very similar to information protection in Microsoft Purview. So once you've chosen the roles, the next step, obviously, is choosing the features. And the features here these are important, but not quite as critical. So, for example, if you want things like BitLocker drive encryption included, Bits, for example, is used for Windows deployment services. Do you want clustering? So if you've got, let's say, you're using this server as a SQL database, you'll probably want some kind of clustering services here. And there's literally lots and lots of different services here. Again, I'm not going to go into all of those here. So once you've selected those, it's just a case of clicking next, 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 off it goes, and it will run the various wizards. So once those services have been installed, for example here, they're here, but they're not necessarily configured. Okay, so the first one is networking. So as you saw previously, you could go into your server and assign individual IP addresses or static IP addresses for all of your users. But to be honest, you would be there all day. If you've got thousands of clients, it would be crazy. So one of the first critical tools that we use is a tool called DHCP server. So DHCP, once you've added the role, I'm just simply going to click onto here and I'm going to go into DHCP. I'll just maximize this so that you can see it. Okay. So DHCP, I'm going to say, do you want to add a server or do you want to manage an authorized server? Now, I've already installed one here and you can see it's detected it and I'm going to click OK. So it's saying, hey, do you want to install it and authorize it? That means it's authorized to give IP addresses out. So I've already done this, so I'm just going to click OK. And you can see that we have DC1. Now, DHCP or Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol is essentially a database, and it's a database of IP address configurations. So for example, I could say I might want to create another scope. So I could say, all right, and we'll call this, let's say, my Oslo scope. Okay. So in my Oslo scope, I'll say next, and I'll put in a range of IP addresses. Let's say 10 to 192.168.1, let's say to 100. Okay, you see, and it's a database within that range. I'm going to give it a standard subnet mask, and I'm going to click next. And now it says, okay, do you want to add any exclusions? So for example, you might have a printer or a server with a particular piece of software on. For this demo, I'm going to say no. How long do you want to lease it? So it works actually exactly the same as your DHCP on your wireless router at home. So initially when your machine comes online, it says, I need an IP address, please. And the DHCP server will basically pop up and say, no problem, I can lend you this configuration. And it basically saves you having to reconfigure that device. So I'm just going to say, yeah, 8 days is fine. I'm going to click onto here. Do you want to configure some other options? Okay, I think I will. So I'm going to click on next. And now it says, okay, what's the router or the default gateway? So in this case, I'm going to say, yep, it's 172. It is 16.0.1. Okay, so this is my router or my default gateway. Okay, so then it asks me for my DNS name, and for this I'm going to type in SEA-DC1 and I attempt to resolve this, and you can see it's gone ahead and it's resolved the IP address here. So I'm going to click on next. And then it says, am I using WINS? Now, WIND is the Windows Internet Naming Service. It's very old. I'm not going to bother with that, so I'm just going to skip by it. Finally, it says, hey, do you want to go ahead and activate the scope? In other words, make this scope available to your users? Yes, I do. So off it goes. And you can now see I've now got 2 scopes as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop down to this first scope here, and if I click onto where it says address pool, you can see that we've got the pool of IP addresses which are available. Below is address leases, so if I had any clients that are currently leasing IP addresses, this is where they would be listed here, and these are the kind of the main things. And if I go into scope options, you can see there are those scope options that we put in. So it's resolving the router address, shows me my clients where the router is. It shows them the IP address for the DNS server, name resolution, and also my domain name here as well. So I'm using the domain name at contoso.com. So IP addressing can be handled by DHCP. Great stuff. So the next one then is DNS, and DNS is the Microsoft DNS name service. So again, I'm just going to come down to DNS here. Now DNS is super important because, as you can see, it doesn't just resolve for Active Directory, but it also resolves for your what we call your forward lookup zones. So in other words, I'm responsible for this domain name. Now that means that if you've got your own company, so bobsboats.com, the question is, do you want to host your domain name on your own, for example, in a server like this, or do you want a web provider to host it, like GoDaddy or Wix or something like that? So in this case, I want to actually manage my own environment. So I'm going to create a new zone, and I'm going to say this is my primary zone because I don't have any other servers on this. And I'm going to just replicate this to any other DNS servers. And I'm going to call this, let's call this bobsboats.com. So let's say I own the domain name bobsboats.com. I click next. And again, it gives you a few options here. Allow only secure dynamic update connections. This prevents hacking, and it's a good. Then you've got dynamic updates. So who is responsible for updating the DNS settings? I'm just going to go ahead for the purpose of this demo and accept that and just click continue. So there you have it. I've now added in a forward lookup zone. Now, just to mention how this works, I've got a little document here. So let's say, for example, I was trying to contact host 1 at bobsboats.com from your network. So what would happen is on your local machine, it would say, do you know where host1.bobsboats.com is? So your machine might go, no, I have no idea where it is. So the way that it runs is, first of all, you type in, where is bobsboats.com? So what you actually don't see is a little dot at the end here. This is called the root name server, and there are 13 root name servers in the world. So what happens is it sends the query to the root name server. So do you know where bobsboats.com is? And the root name server says, I have no idea where Bob's Boats is, but I do know where the .com name server is. Again, the query goes to the .com name server. Do you know where Bob's Boats is? I do. And then finally, it comes back here to where we are authoritative for bobsboats.com. And it says, yes, I know where host1.bobsboats.com is. Its IP address is this. And that, my friends, is how name resolution works with DNS, the domain name system. And it's used everywhere. So when we shop online, when we browse the internet, when we connect to any machine, this is essentially what's happening. And that is how DNS works. And DNS is a critical component for Active Directory. Now, Active Directory is Microsoft's directory service. And in here, once you've added that role, and if I click on the tools and go into Active Directory users and computers, this is where we can then manage all of our users here. So just to give you a little overview of Active Directory, again, I've covered this in many videos before, and I'll put the links below to those. So you can see here, it looks a little bit like, if you remember File Explorer in Windows, it does. But these yellow folders here, we call these organizational units. So with organizational units, the idea of these is you can organize your organization. You might say, hey, this is my Oslo office. Within Oslo, we've got sub-departments within Oslo, sales, marketing, production, and so on. Sometimes, depending on the size of the organization, for example, this one, you can see we've organized them by departments or job roles, yes? Or sometimes machine types, whatever works for you. You do get a number of default folders. You get, or OUs. So you get a couple of default organizational units. One is called the users, and this is a container that contains all your users. And the idea is that all your users is a bit like a filing cabinet. They all just go in one place, but you would then move them and organize them into organizational units. So here you can see I've got an organizational unit called IT. And if I go into IT, you can see we have a number of users here. So if I want to create a user, super simple, I can say I want to create a new and user. And it says, okay, what kind of user do you want this to be? So I can say, well, let's have this as James Kirk. And you can see that it asks you for a logon name, kirkj@contoso.com. And I'm going to say, yeah, that's fine. I'm going to click next. Okay, so with the password, I'm just going to pop in a password here. And if I just click back, you've got some options. Don't allow the user to change the password, or user must change their password at next logon. That's always a good tip for admins. User cannot change their password, or the password never expires. Sometimes you might use these if you're creating what we call service accounts. Okay, so I'm just going to click on next, and I'm going to click on finish. So I've now created my user account for Captain Kirk. And if I just go into the properties of Captain Kirk, you can see I can put in a description, which office he's in, some details here. Then you've got a number of fields here. The account is an important tab. So first of all, the logon hours. So do you want the user to be able to log on 24 hours a day, or just specific hours? You can block, say, I want him to allow or not allow. Likewise, do you want him to log on to all computers or only specific computers? Again, that's your choice. Other things that we've got, you can also, if the user gets locked out, then you can unlock that user account. I love this as well. You can also put an expiry date on the account. So if this was, let's say, a temp or a contractor, that would be quite useful. So the rest of them are generic, with the exception of, let's say, the remote control tab. If you want to enable the user for remote control, again, this might be quite useful for support. Okay, so now we've created a user and you can see that we have a number of organizational units. What else can we do? Well, first of all, you'll notice that some of the accounts have a slightly different icon here. And these are because they are groups. So what is a group? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just right click here. And again, I'm going to click on new and I'm going to come down to new group. So a group is essentially a collection of users. So rather than assigning permissions to individual users, which would be very cumbersome, we can create a group. So we can call the group, we'll call them, let's say, Oslo IT Support. Okay. So after giving it a name, you can then decide on what type of group you want it to be. So by default, it creates a domain local group. If you've got multiple domains, you can create a global group. And in some cases, you can then add that global group to a domain local group. In this case, though, we're only working with a single domain, so I'm just going to call this domain local. Again, this is a security group. I'm not using it to distribute any email, so I'm just going to click on OK here. Now you can see I've successfully created my Oslo IT support. So again, I can go into this and I can then add some users to this. So I can say, hey, okay, who can we add in as members? So you can just simply start typing in members here. So I can type in Jane and I can check the names and you can see it successfully resolved that name. I can bring in, let's say, Kirk J, and again, check that name and there is Captain Kirk. And finally, I might want to bring in Bruno. Let's bring in Bruno, and these three users are now a member of this group. Now, the advantages of groups, of course, is that I can assign permissions to a group. So, for example, if I go into Windows Explorer, and let's say, for example, I created, let's create a new folder. So I'll come into new folder, and let's call this folder data. And in the folder, let's put some documents in. So again, I'll say a new, let's say just a rich text document. I'll call it Andy. So now that we've created our folder, if I go back into data, I can right click, go into properties, and in here you have a security tab. So here in the security tab, I can now say, hey, I want to edit the security tab. I want to maybe add another group in, and I want to bring in my Oslo IT support group. So if I click onto this, and I'm going to say, hey, I want these guys to have full control of this folder. And I simply apply that and click OK. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the benefit of groups. So you can create groups, add users to the group, and then assign them to the resource. Okay, so what is the purpose of an organizational unit? So once you've organized your users into organizational units, the next step then is obviously configuring what the user can and cannot do. So now that I've placed the user into the IT department, you can see he's in here. What is the purpose of an organizational unit then? So if I click into my IT OU, I can click into the properties here, and you can put some details about the organizational unit and who's managing the OU and so on. But this is where the power really comes in. So if I flip back into my server manager, one of the awesome, most powerful tools that we have is a tool called Group Policy. So group policy, and again, I've covered this previously, is absolutely awesome. So first of all, if I just expand the group policy, you can see if I just collapse this down, the root is my domain, so Contoso. And by default, we have what we call a default domain policy. And typically this affects all our users. So where do these settings come from? So if I go into File Explorer here in Windows, and I'm going to scroll down, go into the C drive, and if I go into Users, in here, obviously you'll see a list of any users who have logged on. So typically, if I go into, I'll just go into this user here just now, you'll notice that that user has an item at the bottom here called the ntuser.dat file. And this, my friends, is your profile. And your user profile, you can actually view it if I type in regedit and go into the registry editor. I'm just logging in as an administrator here. So the registry editor is really comprised of a hierarchy of different settings. So for example, the HKey classes root folder here contains all the different types of software that can go into Windows. The HKey current user contains all the details about the user who is currently logged on. For example, what printer settings they're using, what network settings, what software they've got installed, and so on. The other one is the HKey local machine. So in here, details on the machine's hardware, security, what software is on the system, and so on. And then below, you've got HKey users. So this is the details about all the different users who have a logon on this environment or in this environment. So group policy is a very simple tool to help us manage group policy settings. So for example, here, I'm going to go into IT and I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new GPO. And I'm going to call this my IT GPO. Okay. And I'll say OK. And you can see I can now edit it. So now, rather than going into the registry settings, I can now edit the computer configuration or the user configuration. Okay. So for example, I can go into, let's say, policies here, and you have something in here called administrative templates. So for example, I might want to go into the control panel. So these are some of the settings that are in the control panel. So if I want to change the regional language settings, if I want to hide certain areas or hide things in the control panel, if I want to prohibit access, for example, if I want to go into the display settings, I can choose exactly what I want to do. So maybe I don't want my users to make changes. So I could simply go in here and make the optional setting here to enabled, and then my users would not be able to change any settings, and then you would just apply. So this is an incredibly powerful tool, and I did a whole video on this, so definitely go ahead and take a look at that, and I'll pop that in the description below as well. So the next thing that I want to show you then is I'm going to come down into Tools, and I'm going to come into the Event Viewer. So the Event Viewer is an important tool for us as admins to know exactly what's going on in our environment. So typically we will have a number of logs here. And in here we have the application log, we have the very important security log, we have the setup, the system log, and any forwarded events. So other servers that are forwarding their settings or their logs to this server. Now, if I go into the server here, you can see that it's looking pretty good. There's no failures to log in, but ultimately what we're looking for here is failure to log in, because that would indicate that perhaps somebody is trying to hack you. Okay, so if I double click here, you can see it shows me a little record, some details, shows me the machine, who's signing in, the date, the time that they logged on, the machine that they're logging on to. And again, you can break that down and get more detail. All right. Now, if that was unsuccessful login, again, that could indicate that, there's potential misuse going on. Okay. Application logs, again, really useful. So you can see here, there's an error code here. So perhaps something fails, something didn't work quite right. Again, if I double click that, most error codes, you will get an application error, an event ID, and you can then search for that. So if you've got a problem, this is a great resource. I can go online and I can say, yep, okay, that's fine. And it will then go online and you can see that we have a number of support pages here that can help us find those problems. Okay, so what we've looked at then are just some of the basics. I showed you basic configuration at the beginning. We talked about adding different roles and features. So we've gone ahead and added some of those. I've also talked about the fact that you can create users in Active Directory. So we've looked at creating a user. We've looked at the different settings with that user. I've talked a little bit about what group policy is and also how GPOs work. And again, we've just had a quick look at the event viewer. And finally, a common question that I get asked is, Andy, where can I learn all of this? Where can I get the software to do a trial, to set it up, and so on? Well, you've got a couple of options. You can either go into Microsoft Azure and you can spin up a free trial here. Although I will tell you that don't leave your servers on, otherwise you could get billed for that. Alternatively, if you've got your own environment, you can download a copy of Windows Server here. Currently in version 2022, the latest version 2025 is due for release later in the year. And all the documentation is here as well. So you've got the Windows Admin Center details, talks all about what you need. In terms of learning, if you just go to learn.microsoft.com, and there is absolutely tons of learning content here as well to get you up and get you started, from everything from installing, upgrading to configuring. And also you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff here, and it's training, documents, learning materials, and so on. So that will definitely get you started. So there you have it, setting up, deploying, and managing Windows Server, an essential core skill that will hopefully take your career forward. And you combine that with all the cloud skills here, then you're in a really good place. Hey, listen, if you enjoyed it, give me a big thumbs up. It does help the channel. And questions and comments, as always, get those down below. All right, that's it for this time. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Hey, thanks so much for dropping by today. Here's a couple of videos that you may enjoy. And while you're here, go ahead, click on the subscribe button and you won't miss out.